of backdoor conversations going on here, which would appear to be leading to us giving away, once again, the rights of the fishermen of this country.
The great Brexit betrayal. This was the man who basically quadrupled immigration, 4 times higher than Tony Blair.
Keir Starmer's European tour was intended as his grand debut on the international stage, but instead, it turned into a sequence of missteps that exposed him as unpolished and ill-prepared. From being overlooked by Donald Trump to being excluded from key events, Starmer's bid to project himself as a statesman ended in disaster. The biggest blow, however, came after his return to the UK, where he faced a grilling by the media that laid bare his lack of readiness. But before we dive deeper, I'd like to ask for a small favour. If you're enjoying this content, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Did you know that over 98% of viewers watch our videos without subscribing? It's free, and it helps us immensely. So, have you clicked the subscribe button? Brilliant. Thank you so much. Now, back to the topic. Keir Starmer embarked on his European tour with lofty aspirations. He aimed to position himself as a credible statesman capable of mending Britain's strained international relationships and presenting himself as a prime minister in waiting. The itinerary was carefully designed to demonstrate his diplomatic credentials, with high-profile meetings and appearances planned across Europe. But those plans quickly went awry. The British public, particularly those who backed Brexit, are all too aware of the gap between promises and delivery. Starmer's first major setback came when he was conspicuously absent from the reopening ceremony of Notre Dame in Paris. This wasn't a simple oversight or scheduling issue. It was a stark reminder that Starmer's influence on the global stage isn't as significant as he might have hoped. While other prominent leaders took the spotlight, Starmer was left on the sidelines, a visible crack in his carefully cultivated image. The exclusion sent a clear message, prompting political analysts to question his capacity to lead on the international front. One commentator quipped, "If Starmer can't even secure an invitation to a cathedral reopening, how can he handle the complexities of international negotiations as Prime Minister?" The requirement to align with EU regulations and laws to secure trade deals on veterinary agreements only adds to the perception of challenges ahead. As the tour continued, Starmer's attempts to regain his footing only underscored his vulnerabilities. His statements about fostering international cooperation and addressing global challenges seemed unconvincing, given his struggle to establish a strong diplomatic presence. The gap between Keir Starmer's grand ambitions and his real-world influence became painfully clear as his European tour spiraled further into disarray. But the most humiliating episode was still to come, and it didn't take place in Europe. It unfolded in the United States. Starmer's much-touted opportunity to meet Donald Trump, framed by his team as a step towards mending the special relationship, turned into a debacle. Trump's apparent indifference to the Labour leader reduced their encounter to little more than a footnote. The resulting awkward photos and strained interactions quickly became fodder for critics and a field day for social media users. Niall Gardner, a former advisor, delivered a cutting review of Starmer's performance, branding him as weak and woke. This scathing critique summed up the dominant narrative. Starmer's foray onto the international stage had failed to generate any meaningful impact. By the time Starmer boarded his flight back to the UK, the disastrous consequences of his tour were undeniable. What was meant to elevate him as a statesman instead exposed glaring doubts about his ability to champion British interests abroad. His perceived desire to align more closely with the European Union, a body the UK decisively left in 2016, only compounded these concerns. With his credibility in tatters, Starmer faced an even more brutal test at home. A hostile British media ready to dissect every error. If he thought his experience with Trump was uncomfortable, the reality awaiting him back in the UK was far harsher. The scene shifted to the BBC studios, where 6 local radio hosts were prepared to grill Starmer in a series of back-to-back interviews. Known for their merciless approach to politicians, the media had been sharpening their critiques throughout his European misadventures. From the outset, It was clear Starmer wasn't prepared. Questions about his policies quickly exposed his lack of clarity. When challenged on winter fuel allowance cuts, Starmer made a tone-deaf admission. He had never personally struggled to pay utility bills. This response alienated listeners already facing a cost-of-living crisis. As the interviews unfolded, Starmer's attempts to steer the conversation to other topics, such as his plan to reintroduce ASBOs, were swiftly shut down. The hosts refused to let him sidestep their pointed questions, ensuring every inconsistency and misstep was put under the spotlight. What began as a grand European tour to showcase Starmer's leadership potential ended as a cautionary tale, raising doubts about whether he is equipped to navigate the pressures of both international diplomacy and domestic scrutiny. And the Labour leader found himself floundering, scrambling to reclaim control of a narrative slipping through his fingers. One particularly damaging moment came during his interview with BBC Lincolnshire, where the host bluntly asked if Starmer had a problem with Lincolnshire. Pressed on his disconnect with local farmers, Starmer's awkward response did little to dispel concerns about his relevance to rural communities. The issue extended beyond farming, touching on broader frustrations about backroom negotiations, including the rights of British fishermen, a sensitive topic for many. As clips of the interviews flooded social media, public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Users ridiculed Starmer's inability to provide concise answers, branding the interviews as a public relations disaster. Political analysts joined the chorus, highlighting his unclear communication style and apparent detachment from key voter concerns. Starmer's leadership, once seen as a steady hand, now appeared shaky. In just 45 minutes, he had gone from an ambitious leader vying for statesmanship to a figure struggling to defend his policies and connect with voters. The fallout from his media meltdown painted a grim picture for Labour. The perception of Starmer as weak, disconnected, and out of touch with ordinary people gained traction. Critics resurfaced past grievances, from his stance on Brexit to immigration, framing him as a continuation of the party's past missteps rather than a fresh start. The question now is whether Keir Starmer can recover, or if this series of blunders has irreparably damaged his credibility. His European tour, intended as a platform to showcase his international appeal, backfired spectacularly. Being sidelined at the Notre Dame reopening and brushed off by Donald Trump exposed weaknesses in his global standing. Back in the UK, his inability to handle tough questions from BBC radio hosts only deepened doubts about his readiness to lead. Public trust has been severely eroded, and the social media storm has only amplified the perception of a leader out of touch with the electorate. The stakes for both Starmer and Labour are enormous. Rebuilding trust, articulating a clear and compelling vision for the country, and convincing voters that he can challenge the current government are now urgent priorities. If he fails, Labour may be forced to confront the prospect of yet another leadership change. In these politically volatile times, Britain needs a strong and effective opposition to hold the government to account and ensure democratic balance. The future of the Labour Party, and indeed the health of British democracy, now hinges on whether Starmer can turn his fortunes around. If not, his leadership may go down as a cautionary tale of missed opportunities and self-inflicted wounds.